Tonight, we travel gently into a place where quiet footsteps were as familiar as birdsong, where the first light of morning slowly touched smooth stone walls, and where small paws sometimes left soft prints across cool temple floors before the day's work had fully begun. Long before the desert air shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, before merchants opened their baskets and fishermen pushed their boats into the calm waters of the Nile, another peaceful rhythm was already waking. The temples of ancient Egypt were never truly silent. Even in the deepest hours before dawn, there was always something moving. A breeze carried grains of sand across broad courtyards. Oil lamps flickered behind carved pillars. Somewhere, a sleepy priest whispered morning prayers. Somewhere else, a worker quietly swept away yesterday's dust. And somewhere nearby, a cat stretched slowly after a long night. The temple cats belonged to no single person, yet many people quietly looked after them. They wandered where they pleased, resting beneath painted columns, slipping through open gates, and curling themselves into warm patches of sunlight whenever the morning offered them. They were familiar faces to priests, scribes, gardeners, cooks, cleaners, and children who carried baskets through the temple grounds. If you had arrived before sunrise, you might have noticed one sitting silently beside a doorway, its ears turning toward distant sounds long before any human heard them. Another might already be walking along the low walls that surrounded the gardens, balancing with patient confidence while dew still rested upon the leaves. No one hurried the cats. No one expected them to follow strict routines. Yet every day, people quietly shaped their lives around these gentle animals. As the eastern sky slowly brightened with soft shades of gold and pale blue, the first workers entered through heavy wooden gates. Their sandals whispered across worn limestone paths polished by countless generations before them. Each carried simple tools. Some balanced clay jars upon their shoulders. Others held woven baskets filled with bread or vegetables. A few carried bundles of fresh reeds gathered beside the Nile only hours before. The air still held the coolness of night. It was the most comfortable part of the day. Before long, the heat would settle over the land like a heavy blanket, slowing every movement and encouraging even the busiest workers to seek shade whenever they could. But now, everything felt fresh. The scent of damp earth drifted from nearby gardens where vegetables, herbs, and flowering plants were carefully tended. Palm trees barely moved in the gentle breeze. Birds called softly from the riverbanks. One elderly caretaker paused beside a low stone bench. A familiar gray cat waited there. The animal blinked slowly. Its tail wrapped neatly around its paws. Without speaking, the caretaker broke a small piece from yesterday's bread. He placed it gently upon the stone. The cat sniffed. It ate only a little. Then it walked away with quiet dignity, as though accepting a gift rather than depending upon it. The caretaker smiled only slightly before continuing his morning work. This small exchange happened almost every day. It required no conversation. No announcement. It simply belonged to the rhythm of temple life. Ancient Egyptian temples were more than places of worship. They were busy communities where many ordinary people worked from sunrise until evening. Bakers prepared food. Gardeners cared for trees and herbs. Stone workers repaired damaged walls. Scribes copied careful lines onto fresh sheets of papyrus. Cleaners swept courtyards over and over as the desert wind continued bringing new dust. The cats wandered among all of them. Sometimes they watched. Sometimes they slept. Sometimes they disappeared for hours before quietly returning as though they had never been gone. Their independence seemed almost peaceful. They never appeared rushed. Perhaps that was one reason people admired them. The temple kitchen slowly became warmer as cooking fires were lit. Bundles of dry wood cracked softly beneath clay ovens. Large bowls of grain waited to become bread. Women and men worked together, measuring flour, pouring water, kneading dough with steady hands that had repeated these same motions for many years. Nearby, another cat appeared. Its nose lifted toward the smell of baking grain. One young baker noticed. She laughed quietly, not loudly enough to disturb the calm morning, and gently pushed a few crumbs toward the waiting visitor. The cat accepted the offering. Then it settled beneath a table where the warmth from the oven spread slowly across the floor. No one chased it away. As long as the animals caused no trouble, they were welcome companions within many parts of temple life. There were practical reasons for this kindness. Grain stores attracted mice. Where grain gathered, rodents followed. Temple storehouses held precious harvests collected from surrounding farms. Every basket represented many weeks of careful labor beneath the Egyptian sun. Every sack of barley or emmer wheat mattered. Cats helped protect these stores. Without instruction, they hunted quietly through shadows where mice preferred to hide. Their work often happened unseen. A worker opening a grain jar in the morning might simply notice fewer signs of unwanted visitors than expected. No speeches celebrated this quiet success. It became another ordinary part of daily life. The temple itself rose above the surrounding landscape with remarkable strength. Tall columns reached toward the brightening sky. Walls carried carved scenes of offering, harvest, river life, and peaceful ceremonies. Painted colors, though softened by years beneath the sun, still showed hints of deep red, blue, green, and gold. Cats often rested at the base of these walls. Their fur caught the morning light. Their shadows stretched across smooth stone. Sometimes visitors paused to admire them. Children especially watched them with wide, curious eyes. A little boy carrying water beside his mother stopped whenever he spotted kittens. His mother allowed only a brief pause. Work waited. Still, she understood. Even busy mornings could spare a few quiet moments. The kittens themselves knew little of temples or human routines. They chased each other through patches of sunlight. They climbed fallen palm branches. They stumbled awkwardly across uneven stones before learning better balance. Older cats watched patiently nearby. Occasionally one reached out with a gentle paw, reminding an adventurous youngster not to wander too far. The caretakers noticed these families growing throughout the seasons. Some kittens survived into healthy adulthood. Others disappeared. Life along the Nile had always carried both comfort and uncertainty. People accepted this with quiet understanding. The seasons moved gently forward. The river rose and fell. Children became adults. Workers grew old. Cats also lived according to their own quiet seasons. Morning slowly became mid-morning. The sunlight brightened until every carved surface reflected warmth. Sweeping continued. Water jars emptied and were filled again. Fresh flowers gathered from temple gardens were arranged carefully before sacred spaces. The scent of lotus blossoms drifted softly through shaded halls. One white cat slept beneath a flowering tree. A gardener worked nearby. His hands were rough from years of turning soil and carrying heavy baskets. Every so often he glanced toward the sleeping animal. When the sun shifted higher, he quietly moved a woven mat so the cat remained in shade. The animal never woke. Such small kindnesses rarely appeared in written records. Scribes preferred recording taxes, harvests, offerings, and official ceremonies. Yet daily life was surely filled with countless gentle moments like these. Tiny acts of care passed from one ordinary day into another without anyone believing they deserved to be remembered. And yet they formed the true rhythm of human life. The temple well became busier as the morning continued. Workers lowered clay jars into cool water. Ropes creaked softly. Hands passed heavy containers from one person to another. Nearby, several cats waited patiently. Not because they expected food every time. They simply enjoyed being close to familiar people. One young servant always paused before returning indoors. She poured a little water into a shallow stone depression beside the well. Soon two cats approached. They drank quietly. Then each wandered away in different directions. The servant smiled before lifting her jar once more. The temple gardens offered another peaceful world entirely. Date palms provided welcome shade. Fig trees spread broad leaves overhead. Small irrigation channels carried fresh Nile water through carefully arranged beds where onions, herbs, beans, and flowering plants slowly grew. Dragonflies floated above the water. Tiny frogs hid among reeds. Cats explored every corner. Some hunted insects more from curiosity than hunger. Others stretched comfortably beneath bushes where cool earth remained hidden from direct sunlight. Gardeners accepted their company. Sometimes a cat followed quietly behind as weeds were removed. Sometimes both simply enjoyed the stillness together. Beyond the gardens lay workshops where craftsmen repaired wooden furniture, polished stone vessels, and shaped simple tools used throughout the temple. The steady sound of careful work filled the warm air. Wood scraped softly beneath bronze blades. Stone rubbed against stone. Fine dust floated through shafts of sunlight entering open doorways. A striped cat slept atop a folded linen cloth. The carpenter worked around it rather than disturb its rest. Only when he truly needed the cloth did he gently lift the sleeping animal aside. The cat opened one eye. It blinked slowly. Then it settled again only a few steps away. Neither seemed bothered. By midday the heat had become impossible to ignore. The bright Egyptian sun stood high overhead. Stone floors warmed beneath every footstep. The air shimmered beyond temple walls. Work slowed naturally. Even the birds became quieter. People searched for shade. Meals were simple. Bread, onions, beans. Perhaps a little fish if fortune allowed. Water remained precious. Some workers rested against cool stone walls. Others stretched beneath woven shelters built for relief from the relentless sunlight. The cats rested too. Many disappeared into hidden corners where thick temple walls protected them from the hottest hours. One large orange cat preferred an empty storage room. Its floor remained cool throughout the afternoon. Every day it returned there. Everyone knew this. No one interrupted its peaceful sleep. The silence of midday possessed its own special feeling. Conversations became softer. Movements slower. Even thoughts seemed to drift lazily beneath the heavy warmth. The temple itself appeared almost asleep. Only distant sounds continued. A broom across stone. A quiet splash from irrigation channels. The flutter of pigeons taking flight. And occasionally, the soft purring of a contented cat resting somewhere just beyond sight. It was during these peaceful hours that one could truly understand how closely people and animals shared the same landscape. Neither ruled over the other. Both adapted to the same sun. Both sought water. Both appreciated shade. Both welcomed the cool return of evening. As the afternoon slowly stretched onward, shadows lengthened little by little across the courtyards. The hottest air began losing its strength. Workers gradually returned to unfinished tasks. Sweeping resumed. Gardens received another careful watering. Temple entrances welcomed travelers arriving from nearby villages. Dust clung to everyone's sandals. The cats also became active once more. One climbed gracefully onto a low wall overlooking the entrance. From there it watched everyone arriving. Perhaps it searched for familiar faces. Perhaps it simply enjoyed observing the changing patterns of the day. No one could know. That quiet mystery only deepened the affection people felt toward them. Nearby, an elderly scribe carried a bundle of papyrus sheets beneath his arm. His eyesight had slowly weakened with age. His movements were careful now. When he reached his small writing room, he found a familiar black cat already sleeping beside the doorway. He stepped carefully around it. Inside, he mixed fresh ink. He sharpened his reed pen. Outside, the cat continued sleeping peacefully, unaware that another ordinary afternoon was gently unfolding around it. The slow rhythm of temple life continued, almost unchanged, as warm light settled across ancient stone and quiet paws wandered patiently through the heart of ancient Egypt. The afternoon moved with gentle patience, as though the sun itself understood there was no reason to hurry across the wide Egyptian sky. The bright light softened little by little, and the long stone walls of the temple cast cool shadows that slowly stretched across the courtyards. Workers welcomed those growing patches of shade without speaking much about them. They simply stepped into them whenever their tasks allowed, grateful for even a few moments of relief from the day's warmth. The cats noticed the changing light as well. One by one they emerged from quiet corners where they had slept through the hottest hours. A sleek brown cat slipped beneath a wooden bench before crossing an open path toward the gardens. A younger cat climbed onto a low wall, sat perfectly still, and watched a pair of doves settle upon the branches of a sycamore tree. Another wandered into the temple kitchens, where the scent of fresh bread still lingered in the warm air. The kitchens never truly rested. Although the busiest baking had happened before sunrise, there was always another meal to prepare. Clay ovens remained warm for many hours. Ash settled gently inside their rounded mouths. Large baskets held loaves that had cooled enough to be carried into storage rooms. Earthen jars stood neatly along the walls, filled with grain, dried beans, oil, and dates gathered during earlier harvests. An older woman who had worked in the kitchens for many seasons knelt beside one of the grain jars. Her hands were strong from years of kneading dough and lifting heavy baskets. She carefully checked the woven lid before placing it firmly back into position. As she stood, she noticed a familiar cat sitting only a few feet away. Its ears were pointed toward the storage shelves. Its eyes watched quietly. The woman smiled to herself. She had seen this same cat many afternoons. It often waited near the grain rooms, not because anyone had trained it, but because it had discovered that patient observation usually rewarded careful hunters. A faint scratching sound came from behind one of the storage baskets. The cat heard it immediately. Without haste, it lowered its body closer to the floor. The kitchen workers continued their own quiet tasks. None of them interrupted the animal. They trusted its instincts far more than they could ever hope to match with their own eyes. For several long moments, almost nothing happened. The room felt peaceful. Only the soft crackle of cooling embers and the distant voices from another courtyard drifted through the doorway. Then, with one smooth movement, the cat disappeared behind the baskets. Silence returned almost immediately. The woman continued arranging bread without looking further. She understood that the small guardian of the grain had simply resumed its ordinary work. No applause followed. No reward was expected. Life carried on exactly as before. Outside, the temple gardens glowed beneath the gentler afternoon light. The irrigation channels reflected pale blue pieces of the sky between rows of herbs and flowering plants. Bees wandered lazily among blossoms. Dragonflies schemed across the narrow streams that carried cool Nile water through carefully shaped beds of vegetables. The gardeners worked slowly. Each movement seemed measured by long experience rather than urgency. One man loosened the soil around young onion plants using a simple wooden tool polished smooth by years of use. Beside him rested a clay water jar wrapped in damp cloth to help keep its contents cool. As he paused to drink, a small gray kitten appeared from beneath a date palm. It walked carefully over the warm ground, placing each paw with quiet confidence despite its young age. The gardener lowered his hand. The kitten sniffed his fingers. For a few peaceful moments neither moved. The breeze stirred the palm leaves overhead. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, another worker called softly to a friend. The kitten rubbed gently against the man's ankle before wandering away toward the flowers. The gardener watched it disappear between green stems. Then he returned to his work without disturbing the calm that surrounded them both. The temple was not made only of stone. Its true life came from the many ordinary people whose days followed familiar patterns. Sweepers rose before dawn. Gardeners measured the seasons by growing plants. Water carriers judged each day by the weight of their jars. Scribes counted the passing years by the pages they filled with careful writing. Children remembered days by simple events. The first ripe figs. A cool evening breeze. The birth of a litter of kittens beneath a staircase. A cat sleeping beside the same doorway every afternoon. These small memories quietly stitched one season to the next. In one shaded corridor, a young apprentice carried fresh papyrus rolls toward the scribe's rooms. His sandals made only soft sounds against the smooth limestone floor. The walls beside him were covered with painted scenes that had already watched over countless generations. He had walked this hallway hundreds of times. He knew where the floor dipped slightly beneath his feet. He knew which doorway always remained open to welcome fresh air. He also knew that an old white cat usually slept beside the northern column. Sure enough, there it was. Curled tightly with its tail wrapped over its nose. The apprentice smiled. He stepped a little wider around the sleeping animal, careful not to wake it. The cat remained asleep. Perhaps it trusted the familiar footsteps. Perhaps it had learned that these quiet humans rarely caused trouble. Trust, after all, often grows from countless peaceful days rather than a single moment. The afternoon slowly leaned toward evening. The harsh brightness of midday softened into warmer colors. Golden light settled across the temple walls, making carved figures appear almost alive as long shadows stretched across the stone. Birdsong returned. The heavier heat slowly drifted upward into the open sky. Workers found themselves breathing more easily. Some of the fishermen could already be seen in the distance, preparing their small boats along the Nile. Nets were carefully folded. Wooden oars rested inside the narrow vessels. The river reflected the lowering sun with gentle ripples that carried soft flashes of light toward the shore. Temple cats sometimes wandered close to the river. Not every cat enjoyed the water. Most preferred watching from dry ground. They sat upon stones or grassy banks, studying the quiet movement of reeds as fish disturbed the surface from below. One fisherman often greeted the same striped cat each evening. He never expected it to come closer. He simply nodded as he untied his boat. The cat watched silently. When the fisherman returned after sunset with his catch, a few tiny scraps sometimes found their way onto the riverbank. Nothing more. Nothing less. The arrangement needed no words. The river itself seemed to breathe. Its calm waters carried life across the land just as they had done for countless generations. Boats drifted. Water birds searched the shallows. Children filled jars beneath the careful eyes of their parents. Along the muddy banks, cattle lowered their heads to drink before returning slowly toward nearby fields. The cats watched these rhythms as naturally as the people did. The seasons of the Nile shaped every living creature. As evening approached, the temple workshops began closing for the day. Wooden tools were cleaned and placed neatly upon shelves. Stone dust was swept from work tables. Half-finished carvings waited patiently for tomorrow's hands. A young carpenter stretched his tired back before sitting upon a low stool outside the workshop. His fingers ached pleasantly after many hours of shaping cedar wood. Nearby, an orange cat climbed into his lap without invitation. The carpenter laughed softly under his breath. He rested one rough hand upon the animal's back. Its fur felt warm from the lingering sunlight. The cat began to purr. Not loudly. Only enough for the quiet vibration to be felt beneath his hand. For several peaceful minutes, neither wished to move. There was comfort in simply sharing the fading daylight. Around them, other workers slowly gathered their belongings. Clay cups were rinsed. Water jars were covered. Simple sandals were brushed free of dust before the journey home. Some lived in small mud brick houses close to the temple. Others walked farther, following narrow roads that crossed fields and canals before reaching their villages. Many carried bread wrapped in linen cloth. Some carried onions, herbs, or a handful of dates to share with waiting families. The temple gradually became quieter. Not empty. Simply calmer. The priests continued their evening duties. A few guards remained at the gates. Several caretakers prepared sleeping places for those who would remain through the night. The cats settled into their own familiar routines. Some climbed onto warm rooftops where they could watch the stars appear one by one. Others curled beneath benches that still held the day's stored warmth. A mother cat gathered her growing kittens inside a quiet storage room lined with baskets of reeds. The kittens nursed sleepily before tumbling over one another in slow, clumsy play. Their tiny paws made almost no sound upon the woven mats. Outside, darkness spread gently across the land. The desert beyond the temple cooled with surprising speed. The day's fierce heat quietly slipped away, leaving behind air that felt soft against tired skin. The scent of evening fires drifted from nearby homes where families prepared their final meals before rest. Bread warmed beside small hearts. Lentil stew simmered in clay pots. Children spoke more quietly as sleep slowly crept into their voices. The temple cats wandered between pools of lamplight and deep shadow, moving with the same quiet confidence they had shown since sunrise. For them, the coming night was not an ending. It was simply another peaceful chapter in the endless rhythm of temple life, where every dawn, every meal, every quiet footstep, and every gentle act of care became part of the living heartbeat of ancient Egypt. Night settled gently across the temple, not all at once, but little by little, as though the darkness wished to be as respectful as the people who lived and worked there. The last warmth of the day slowly slipped away from the stone walls. Above the courtyards, the sky deepened from soft gold into quiet shades of violet and blue, until countless stars appeared with the steady brightness that had guided travelers along the Nile for generations beyond memory. The evening air felt wonderfully different from the afternoon. It carried coolness. It carried the scent of damp river reeds. It carried the faint smell of smoke rising from cooking fires in distant villages. After so many hours beneath the powerful Egyptian sun, every slow breath seemed lighter. The temple itself became calmer. Most of the day's labor had ended. The gardeners had laid aside their tools. The bakers had covered the remaining bread with woven cloth. The stone workers had swept away fine white dust. The scribes had rolled their papyrus sheets and carefully cleaned the tips of their reed pens before placing them inside wooden boxes. Only a few lamps remained burning. Their small flames trembled gently whenever a breeze wandered through the long corridors. The light they gave was warm rather than bright. It rested softly upon painted walls and carved pillars, leaving the corners in peaceful shadow. The cats moved comfortably between both. A dark-coated cat stepped quietly across a wide courtyard where moonlight touched the smooth limestone floor. Its paws made almost no sound. It paused beside a shallow basin filled earlier that evening with fresh water. The surface reflected the stars like tiny pieces of polished silver. The cat drank slowly. Each ripple gently disturbed the reflection before the water became still once more. Nearby, one of the temple guards watched without speaking. His long shift would continue until dawn. He leaned lightly against a heavy wooden gate while holding a simple spear polished smooth through years of careful use. The night was usually peaceful. His greatest companions were the sounds around him. The rustle of palm leaves. The distant call of an owl. The whisper of wind moving through open courtyards. And every now and then, the familiar shape of a temple cat crossing silently through the darkness. The guard knew many of them by sight. There was an old grey tom with a torn ear who preferred the eastern walls. A white female who often visited the herb garden before sunrise. A striped cat that liked sleeping near the grain stores. He had never given them names. They seemed complete without them. Each belonged to the temple in its own quiet way. Far beyond the walls, the Nile continued its slow journey toward the sea. Even at night, the river never rested. Its current remained gentle but steady. Moonlight shimmered across its surface. Fishing boats tied securely along the shore rocked almost too softly to notice. The reeds bent with every passing breeze. Somewhere, a frog called from the riverbank. Another answered farther downstream. These peaceful sounds traveled through the cool air until they blended with the silence itself. Inside the temple, an elderly caretaker carried a small clay lamp through one of the storage buildings. He moved carefully. He had walked these rooms for many years. His knees no longer bent as easily as they once had. His shoulders carried the slow stiffness that comes after a lifetime of lifting baskets, sweeping floors, and carrying water. Still, his movements remained steady. He stopped beside the grain jars one last time before resting. Everything appeared in order. The woven lids remained tightly fastened. The walls were dry. Nothing seemed disturbed. As he turned toward the doorway, he noticed two bright eyes watching him from the shadows. The familiar striped cat. It sat perfectly still. Its tail curled neatly around its paws. The caretaker lowered himself slowly onto a low wooden stool. He had no urgent task left. For a little while, he simply rested. The cat came closer. Not quickly. Only one quiet step after another. When it reached the old man's feet, it settled comfortably upon the cool floor. Neither expected anything from the other. The companionship itself was enough. Outside, the temple gardens had become another world beneath the moon. The flowers folded gently for the night. The broad leaves of the lotus floated peacefully upon still pools of water. Tiny insects drifted above the irrigation channels, catching the moonlight with delicate wings. The palm trees stood almost motionless against the sky. One young gardener remained behind to water several newly planted herbs before sleeping. Night watering helped protect the tender plants from the fierce daytime heat. He carried two clay jars balanced across a wooden pole resting upon his shoulders. The journey between the well and the garden was slow. The water was heavy. The path uneven. Each careful step mattered. As he poured water around the roots of a small herb bed, he noticed a kitten watching from beneath a cluster of papyrus reeds. Its ears were much too large for its tiny head. Its eyes reflected the lamplight like polished amber. The gardener smiled quietly. He dipped 2 fingers into the cool water remaining inside the jar and sprinkled a few drops onto the dry ground nearby. The kitten stepped forward with gentle curiosity. It sniffed the damp earth before settling down to watch him work. The young man continued watering until every plant had received enough. The kitten remained nearby the entire time. Sometimes the smallest company made long work feel much lighter. Within another part of the temple complex, several priests quietly completed their evening rituals. Their footsteps echoed softly through halls lined with painted scenes that had watched over centuries of peaceful mornings and quiet nights. Oil lamps illuminated carefully carved figures upon the walls. The scent of incense drifted gently through the air. Everything happened without haste. The priests had learned long ago that careful work could not be rushed. Outside the sacred chambers, 2 cats rested beside one another beneath a stone bench. Neither appeared interested in the quiet ceremonies taking place nearby. One slept deeply. The other watched the moth circling around a nearby lamp. Its head turned slowly each time delicate wings passed through the light. It never leaped. Perhaps it was content simply to observe. Perhaps a full meal earlier that evening had left little reason for hunting. Peace often follows enough food and a safe place to rest. The temple roof welcomed another group of quiet visitors each night. Several cats climbed narrow stairways worn smooth by generations of careful feet. From above, the world seemed wonderfully still. The courtyards lay silent below. The river gleamed in the distance. Small fires marked the villages where families prepared for sleep. The stars filled every open space overhead. One young cat stretched along the warm stone, still holding a little of the day's heat. It blinked slowly toward the sky. A cool breeze passed over its fur. For a long while, it remained completely still. The rooftops became peaceful resting places after sunset. The stone released its warmth gradually into the night air. Many animals understood this. Birds settled beneath roof edges. Small creatures hid within cracks between stones. The cats found comfortable places where they could sleep while remaining alert enough to notice any unfamiliar sound. Far below, the temple well reflected a circle of moonlight. A servant arrived carrying empty water jars that would be filled before dawn. Early morning workers always needed fresh water waiting for them. The servant lowered the rope with practiced hands. The bucket disappeared into darkness. A quiet splash echoed upward. As she lifted the heavy rope once more, she noticed a familiar black cat sitting beside the well. It had followed her many evenings. Not close enough to become a burden. Just close enough to share the walk. When she finished filling the jars, she poured a little water into the shallow stone hollow beside the well. The cat drank. She smiled softly. Then both continued on their separate paths. The temple never required grand gestures to become beautiful. Its beauty lived inside countless ordinary habits repeated with kindness. A worker remembering to leave water for thirsty animals. A baker brushing crumbs toward a patient companion. A gardener shifting a woven mat so a sleeping cat remained in cool shade. A guard choosing not to disturb a peaceful animal resting beside the gate. These moments passed almost unnoticed. No scribe recorded them. No monument celebrated them. Yet together they formed the gentle fabric of daily life. As midnight approached, silence deepened further. The distant villages had grown quiet. Children slept beside their parents within cool mud-brick homes. Cooking fires faded into glowing embers. The fishermen rested before another early morning upon the Nile. Only a few voices remained awake across the countryside. The temple seemed to breathe slowly beneath the stars. A breeze wandered through open gateways. Palm leaves whispered overhead. The scent of the river drifted across the courtyards. The cats continued their quiet patrols. One crossed the outer wall with graceful balance. Another slipped between tall columns where moonlight painted pale shapes across the floor. A mother cat returned to her hidden nest carrying food for her growing kittens. Tiny noses lifted toward her before settling once more into peaceful sleep. The hours before dawn possessed a special calm unlike any other part of the day. The world felt suspended between yesterday's work and tomorrow's labor. Nothing hurried. Nothing demanded attention. Even time itself seemed to move more softly. Within that gentle stillness, the temple cats carried on exactly as they always had, sharing the quiet hours with the ordinary people whose careful hands swept the floors, baked the bread, tended the gardens, guarded the gates, and welcomed each new sunrise with the same patient rhythm that had echoed through ancient Egypt for generations. The darkest hours of the night were never truly empty. They held their own quiet life, hidden beneath the wide blanket of stars and wrapped in the cool breath that drifted across the Nile. Long before the first bird called to the coming morning, long before the first baker reached for grain or the first gardener lifted a clay jar of water, the temple rested in a peaceful stillness that seemed almost sacred. The stone walls, warm through most of the day, had now cooled beneath the clear night sky. Their surfaces released the last traces of stored heat into the air. Anyone sitting quietly beside them could feel the gentle change. It was one of the small comforts that workers came to know without ever speaking about it. A narrow passage along the western side of the temple remained almost completely dark. Only a little moonlight reached its smooth floor. Here, one of the oldest temple cats began its slow nightly walk. Its coat had once been deep black. Now silver hairs had appeared around its face. One ear carried a small notch from some forgotten encounter many years before. Its steps were slower than they had once been. There was no hurry. Age had taught the cat that the night belonged to patience. The old cat paused beneath a carved column. It sat quietly. Its eyes remained open. Its ears turned gently toward every distant sound. Somewhere beyond the walls, reeds whispered beside the river. A night bird called only once before falling silent again. The breeze shifted. The old cat seemed to understand every sound without needing to search for its source. Many seasons had passed beneath these same stars. Many floods of the Nile had come and gone. The cat had watched young workers become fathers. It had watched children grow into careful apprentices. It had seen new litters of kittens appear each spring. The temple had changed little. That sameness offered a quiet kind of comfort. Inside one of the sleeping rooms, several young servants rested upon woven reed mats spread across the floor. Their work had begun before sunrise and ended only after darkness settled across the land. Their bodies welcomed the chance to rest. The room held very few possessions. A folded linen blanket. A small wooden box for personal belongings. A clay water jar placed near the doorway. Simple sandals rested neatly beside each sleeping mat. The air smelled faintly of clean linen, dry reeds, and cool stone. Near the entrance, curled into a perfect circle, slept a small sandy-colored cat. No one remembered exactly when it had first appeared. Perhaps it had wandered into the temple as a kitten. Perhaps someone had quietly carried it inside after finding it alone near the riverbank. Now it simply belonged. The servants accepted its company without question. One young woman stirred gently in her sleep. The cat lifted its head for only a moment. Its eyes half opened. Seeing nothing unusual, it tucked its nose beneath its tail once again. Outside, the stars slowly wheeled overhead. To the people of ancient Egypt, the night sky was familiar and deeply respected. Many workers knew the seasons by the stars just as they knew them by the rise of the river or the growing warmth of the wind. Although few ordinary laborers studied the heavens in great detail, many looked upward before sleeping. The clear desert air made the stars appear close enough to touch. Children often asked their parents about the brightest ones. The answers were gentle. Simple stories passed quietly from one generation to the next. The cats never looked toward the stars for long. Their attention belonged mostly to the earth. A rustle beneath dry leaves. A tiny movement beside a wall. The scent carried upon the wind. The world spoke to them in different ways. Near the temple gardens, a caretaker walked slowly with a small oil lamp. He was checking the irrigation channels one last time before resting. The water moved quietly through narrow paths cut into the earth. Everything appeared as it should. No banks had collapsed. No channels were blocked. Tomorrow's plants would receive enough water. As he turned toward home, he noticed two kittens chasing each other's shadows beneath the moonlight. They leaped with great seriousness. Sometimes they caught nothing but empty air. Then they immediately tried again. The caretaker smiled. The sight reminded him of his own children many years before. Children also found endless wonder in simple games. One kitten suddenly stopped. Its ears stood tall. Its attention shifted toward the sound of soft footsteps. Their mother appeared from behind a cluster of papyrus reeds. Without making a sound, she walked past them. The playful kittens forgot their game at once and hurried after her, their tiny paws making almost no noise upon the dusty ground. The family disappeared into the darkness together. The caretaker watched until they were gone. Then he continued home beneath the quiet stars. Farther inside the temple complex, the grain store remained one of the busiest places for cats during the night. The heavy doors stood closed. Inside, countless baskets and jars held precious harvests collected from nearby farms. Every grain represented many hours beneath the Egyptian sun. Fields had been plowed by hand. Seeds scattered carefully. Water guided through canals. Harvests gathered with sickles. Bundles carried upon tired shoulders. Nothing had been easy. Protecting those stores mattered deeply. The cats understood their own part without instruction. One lean gray hunter moved silently between rows of baskets. Its whiskers brushed woven reeds. Its paws landed softly upon packed earth. The room smelled of grain, straw, clay, and dry wood. Somewhere behind one of the storage jars came the faintest scratching sound. The cat stopped. It lowered its body until its belly nearly touched the floor. Everything became still. Several long moments passed. The scratching came again. Patiently, quietly, the hunter waited. Outside, the temple remained silent. Inside, the balance between harvest and hunger quietly continued, just as it had through countless nights before. Not every cat hunted. Many simply wandered. One white female liked visiting the broad entrance court after midnight. The stone there reflected moonlight so brightly that the ground almost seemed silver. She walked slowly across its smooth surface before settling beside one of the great statues guarding the entrance. The enormous carved figure had stood there longer than anyone alive could remember. Wind had softened its edges. Sunlight had faded some of its painted colors. Yet it remained calm and watchful. The cat curled beside its massive foot. Compared with the great statue, she seemed very small. Yet together they shared the same peaceful night. The temple breathed quietly around them. The hours passed almost unnoticed. A breeze carried the scent of wet river mud after water touched the banks farther upstream. Palm leaves answered with a gentle rustling sound. The coolness deepened just before dawn. This was the moment when many sleeping workers instinctively pulled their linen coverings a little closer around themselves. The nights in Egypt could surprise those unfamiliar with the desert. After the fierce daytime heat, the cool darkness often felt refreshing. Within one modest mud brick house near the temple walls, a baker awoke before anyone else in his family. His body had followed the same schedule for many years. He no longer needed anyone to wake him. He sat quietly for a few moments while his eyes adjusted to the darkness. The room was simple. His wife still slept peacefully. 2 children rested nearby upon woven mats. A small clay lamp waited beside yesterday's empty bread basket. The baker stood slowly, careful not to disturb anyone. Outside his doorway, a familiar tabby cat waited. It always seemed to know when the baker would rise. Perhaps it recognized the tiny sounds made before dawn. Perhaps it simply enjoyed greeting the first person awake each morning. The baker nodded gently. He never spoke aloud. Words felt unnecessary during these peaceful hours. He broke a small piece from the previous day's loaf. The bread had become firm overnight, but it remained good. He placed the piece upon a flat stone. The cat accepted the offering with quiet gratitude. Then the baker continued toward the temple ovens while the stars still filled the sky. The narrow streets between the mud brick homes remained almost empty. Only a few lanterns glowed behind wooden shutters. A donkey shifted quietly in its shelter. Somewhere, a rooster stirred but had not yet begun to crow. The village still belonged to the night. The baker's sandals brushed gently against the dusty road. The cool earth beneath his feet would soon become warm again. By midday it would almost burn. But for now, every step felt pleasant. As he approached the temple gates, he found one of the night guards preparing to hand over his duties to the morning watch. Both men exchanged quiet greetings. The guard looked tired but peaceful. His long hours beneath the stars had passed without trouble. Nearby, 3 temple cats sat together upon the low wall as though waiting for the new day to begin. The eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of pale gray. Morning was still some time away, yet the darkness had already begun its slow retreat. The baker disappeared into the kitchens. Soon dry wood would crackle inside the ovens. Fresh flour would be mixed with cool water. Hands would knead dough in familiar rhythms. The warm smell of baking bread would once again drip through the temple courtyards. And as it had on countless mornings before, the temple cats would quietly return, following the comforting scent through the cool air as another peaceful day in ancient Egypt gently began. The first light of dawn arrived so gently that no one could point to the exact moment when night became morning. The stars slowly faded into the brightening sky. The eastern horizon softened from deep blue to pale gray, then to gentle shades of rose and gold. Thin clouds caught the earliest sunlight long before its warmth reached the earth. Across the broad valley of the Nile, the land seemed to awaken one quiet breath at a time. The temple stood patiently where it always had. Its great stone walls welcomed another day. Its columns cast long blue shadows across the courtyards. Its gateways waited silently for the steady flow of workers who would soon arrive. The coolness of night still lingered upon the limestone floors. Anyone walking barefoot would have felt the smooth stone pleasantly cool beneath their feet. Before long, that coolness would disappear beneath the growing strength of the sun. But for now, the morning belonged to gentle comfort. The first sounds came from the birds. Small swallows darted through the open courtyards, their wings cutting softly through the still air. Pigeons settled upon high ledges before fluttering down to search for scattered seeds left from the previous day. A dove called from the branches of a sycamore tree growing beside the temple garden. Its quiet song echoed gently against the ancient walls. The cats heard every note. One by one, they stretched after their night's rest. A large striped tom climbed down from the rooftop where he had spent the cooler hours sleeping beneath the stars. He paused halfway down a worn staircase, arching his back before carefully washing one paw. His movements carried no urgency. Each motion seemed perfectly timed. He rubbed behind one ear. He cleaned the other. Then he continued toward the courtyard as though following an invisible routine known only to himself. Nearby, a young cream-colored cat emerged from beneath a wooden cart. The cart had remained empty overnight after delivering bundles of reeds to the temple workshops. The kitten blinked against the growing light. Its whiskers twitched. It sniffed the fresh morning air. Everything smelled different from the afternoon. The earth still held moisture gathered during the cool night. The scent of river reeds drifted gently through the open gate. Fresh bread had not yet begun baking, but the faint smell of dry grain already floated from the nearby storehouses. Morning always carried promise. The first workers appeared just as the horizon brightened. They arrived quietly, many still waking fully as they crossed the dusty paths leading toward the temple. Some carried simple wooden tools across their shoulders. Others balanced baskets woven from reeds. Several women brought clay jars that would soon be filled with cool water from the temple well. Conversations remained soft. No one wished to disturb the peaceful beginning of the day. Many greeted one another with warm smiles rather than words. They had worked together for many years. Their friendship rested comfortably inside familiar routines. A young sweeper entered through the eastern gate carrying a long palm broom. She was among the first to arrive every morning. By sunrise the courtyards needed to look clean and welcoming. The desert wind never stopped bringing new sand. Every day the same work returned. She did not complain. She simply began. The broom whispered gently across the limestone floor. Fine dust gathered into neat lines. Small leaves carried by yesterday's breeze were swept into baskets. The work required patience rather than strength. As she moved across the courtyard, a small gray cat quietly followed behind her. Not closely. Only enough to remain nearby. Perhaps the movement of the broom stirred tiny insects from the cracks between the stones. Perhaps the cat simply enjoyed her company. The young woman glanced back once. She smiled. Without interrupting her work, she slowed her pace just a little. The cat continued walking behind her. For several peaceful minutes they crossed the broad courtyard together, each following a different purpose yet sharing the same quiet morning. Near the temple kitchens, another day was beginning. Bundles of firewood were stacked neatly beside the ovens. The oldest baker arrived carrying a sack of freshly ground flour upon his shoulder. Though his beard had grown white over the years, his hands remained steady. They remembered every movement needed to transform grain into bread. He lowered the heavy sack onto a wooden table with practiced care. Another worker poured cool water into a large clay bowl. The flour followed. Soon both hands disappeared into the soft mixture. The dough slowly formed beneath firm but gentle fingers. The smell was simple. Fresh grain. Cool water. Clean clay. Wood smoke waiting patiently to rise. The cats appeared almost as soon as the work began. Not because they expected a feast. Only because the kitchens had always been full of familiar sights and comforting warmth. One elderly cat settled beside the doorway where the morning sunlight had just begun reaching the floor. It curled its tail neatly around its body and watched everything without moving. The bakers greeted it with quiet nods. No one found its presence unusual. It had been part of these mornings for as long as many could remember. Outside, the temple gardens glistened beneath tiny drops of dew. Although Egypt received little rain, cool nights often left enough moisture for delicate beads of water to gather upon broad leaves before sunrise. The droplets reflected the growing light like tiny polished stones. The gardeners appreciated these quiet mornings. They walked slowly between the planting beds, checking each row before the heat arrived. One elderly gardener carried a small woven basket filled with fresh seedlings. His hands were darkened by years of working the rich soil carried by the Nile floods. Every wrinkle upon his face seemed shaped by sunlight and patient labor. He knelt beside a narrow bed of herbs. Carefully, he loosened the earth with a wooden tool. One seedling after another found its place. The work required attention. Young roots were fragile. The soil needed gentle hands. As he worked, a familiar white cat appeared from beneath the date palms. She stretched slowly before lying beside him in the cool earth. Neither disturbed the other. The gardener quietly planted. The cat quietly rested. The soft rustle of palm leaves filled the silence between them. Sometimes companionship asked for nothing more than shared stillness. Across the temple grounds, the well soon became the center of morning activity. The first water carriers formed a loose line, each waiting patiently for their turn. Clay jars rested beside sandaled feet. The ropes creaked softly as buckets disappeared into the deep darkness below. A splash echoed upward. Moments later, cool water emerged glistening in the morning light. The workers moved carefully. Water was precious. Every drop mattered. Some would travel to the kitchens. Some would be carried into the gardens. Some would fill washing basins. Some would cool thirsty workers as the afternoon heat returned. A small black kitten watched the entire process with endless curiosity. It sat beside one of the larger jars, tilting its head each time the rope moved. When the bucket splashed into the well, the kitten's ears lifted sharply. When the bucket rose again, its eyes followed every movement. One of the water carriers noticed. She dipped her fingertips into the freshly drawn water and let a few cool drops fall upon the smooth stone. The kitten stepped forward carefully. It licked the tiny droplets before looking up with bright, curious eyes. The woman smiled gently. Then she lifted her heavy jar and continued toward the kitchens. Morning sunlight now spread across the upper walls of the temple. The carved figures seemed to awaken beneath the growing brightness. Long shadows slowly shortened. The air remained cool, but everyone knew it would not last. The workers naturally adjusted their pace. Tasks requiring the greatest effort would be finished before midday if possible. The gardeners hurried only slightly. The builders lifted heavier stones while the temperature remained pleasant. The sweepers finished broad courtyards before the limestone reflected the fierce afternoon sun. The cats understood the changing hours without clocks or calendars. They followed light instead. They followed warmth. They followed quiet instinct. One young cat climbed onto a low wall where the first sunlight reached. It stretched across the warm stone, closing its eyes as though welcoming the day itself. Nearby, two temple children carried baskets filled with fresh lotus flowers gathered before dawn. The blossoms would decorate sacred spaces within the temple. The children walked carefully, trying not to spill a single flower. As they passed the resting cat, one little girl slowed her steps. She looked at the animal with quiet admiration. The cat opened one eye. For a long moment they simply watched one another. Then the children continued toward the inner halls. The cat settled back into its patch of sunlight. Neither had interrupted the other's peaceful morning. Within the scribes' chambers, another kind of work quietly began. Fresh papyrus sheets were unrolled upon smooth wooden tables. Small dishes of black and red ink waited beside sharpened reed pens. The room smelled faintly of dry reeds, ink, and polished wood. A young apprentice carefully arranged each writing tool exactly where his teacher preferred it. He had learned that careful preparation made long hours of writing much easier. As he finished arranging the table, a familiar brown cat leaped lightly onto a nearby windowsill. It sat facing the garden, watching butterflies drift above the flowers outside. The apprentice laughed softly under his breath. The cat never entered the writing room completely. It always chose the same windowsill. Perhaps it enjoyed the morning breeze that drifted through the open window. Perhaps it simply liked the view. The apprentice accepted the quiet visitor as another part of each working day. Outside, the sun climbed steadily higher. The cool morning slowly gave way to gentle warmth. The temple had fully awakened. Brooms whispered across stone. Water splashed into clay jars. Bread baked inside warm ovens. Gardeners tended young plants. Scribes prepared fresh pages. Guards changed their watch. Children carried flowers. And among them all, the temple cats wandered with calm confidence, as they always had, weaving their quiet lives through every corner of the ancient sanctuary while another peaceful Egyptian day unfolded beneath the brightening sky. The morning grew brighter with each passing hour, yet the air still held a gentle freshness that would soon disappear beneath the strong Egyptian sun. Long rays of light reached through the temple gateways, stretching across polished stone floors before slowly shortening as the sun climbed higher into the cloudless sky. Every morning followed a familiar rhythm. The people who worked at the temple rarely needed to think about what came next. Their hands remembered. Their feet knew which paths to follow. Their eyes recognized the smallest changes in the buildings and gardens. Even after many years, there was comfort in repeating the same careful work. The cat seemed to understand this rhythm just as naturally. One sandy-colored cat walked along the top of a low garden wall, placing each paw with perfect balance. The wall separated the vegetable beds from a narrow path leading toward the temple kitchens. The stone had been warmed just enough by the morning sun to feel pleasant beneath its paws. Below, two gardeners worked quietly among rows of onions. Their wooden hoes loosened the earth with slow, practiced movements. They spoke only now and then. Most of the morning passed in peaceful silence. They had worked beside one another for many seasons. Conversation was no longer necessary to share the work. One gardener paused to straighten his back. Years of bending over growing plants had left his shoulders stiff each morning. He rested both hands upon his knees and looked across the garden. The sandy-colored cat had stopped above him. For a few moments, both simply watched the same gentle scene. Butterflies drifted among the flowers. A pair of ibis searched the damp ground beside a narrow irrigation channel. Dragonflies schemed across the water with delicate wings that flashed blue in the sunlight. The gardener smiled quietly. Then he returned to loosening the soil around the young plants. Nearby, the irrigation channels carried cool Nile water through every corner of the garden. The water moved slowly. There was no rushing current. Only a steady flow that had been carefully guided by many hands. Small gates made from wood and packed earth directed the water toward different planting beds. An older worker walked beside the channels, checking each one. If a little mud had slipped into the path, he gently cleared it away. If water flowed too quickly, he adjusted the small barrier with careful hands. He had performed this task for longer than many of the younger workers had been alive. The cats often followed him. Not because the work interested them, but because the damp banks attracted frogs, insects, and tiny birds. A young gray cat crouched beside the water. Its ears pointed forward. Its whiskers trembled slightly. A dragonfly landed upon a reed only a short distance away. The cat watched with complete concentration. The dragonfly lifted into the air again. The cat remained perfectly still. It did not leap. It seemed content simply to observe the tiny creature dancing above the water. The morning breeze gently stirred the papyrus reeds. Their soft rustling blended with the quiet splash of flowing water. Together they formed a peaceful music that needed no instruments. Beyond the gardens, the temple kitchens had become warm with the steady heat of the ovens. Fresh loaves rested upon woven trays. Their golden crusts filled the room with the comforting scent of baked grain. The bakers moved carefully around one another. One shaped new dough. Another turned finished loaves. A younger apprentice carried cooled bread toward the storage rooms. His arms were full. He walked slowly, making sure not to drop even one loaf. Near the doorway sat an elderly white cat. Its eyes remained half closed. The warmth from the ovens reached exactly the place where it rested. It had chosen this same spot almost every morning for years. Everyone knew to step around it. No one thought twice about doing so. The apprentice smiled as he passed. He had grown up seeing the old cat there. Some mornings he wondered whether the temple would feel quite the same if that quiet companion ever chose another resting place. Inside the grain store, the cool air felt different from the warmth outside. Thick walls protected the harvest from both heat and moisture. Rows of clay jars stood beside carefully woven baskets filled with wheat and barley. Each container had been sealed with care. Each represented months of patient labor in the surrounding fields. A middle-aged keeper slowly inspected every storage vessel. He gently pressed each lid. He looked for signs of insects. He brushed away loose dust with a small reed broom. As he worked, a familiar striped cat appeared between two large baskets. The keeper nodded in greeting. The cat paused. For a moment they simply acknowledged one another. Neither expected anything more. The keeper continued his inspection. The cat disappeared deeper into the quiet rows of grain. Both had their own work. Both performed it without complaint. Outside the temple walls, the nearby village had fully awakened. Smoke rose from mudbrick homes where late breakfasts were still being prepared. Children carried water from small wells. Donkeys patiently waited while baskets were secured across their backs. Potters shaped damp clay beneath simple shelters that protected them from the growing sunlight. Weavers sat before upright looms, guiding linen thread through careful patterns that would one day become clothing, blankets, or temple cloths. Life moved slowly. There was always work. Yet there was rarely a reason to rush. The seasons taught patience. The river taught patience. Even the desert, with its endless horizon, reminded people that many things unfolded only in their own time. One temple cat often wandered beyond the walls into the village. The villagers recognized it immediately. Children greeted it with quiet smiles. An elderly potter sometimes placed a small bowl of water beside his workshop during the hottest months. The cat never stayed for long. It simply wandered through the familiar streets before returning to the temple by afternoon. Its daily journey had become part of the village's own rhythm. People noticed if it appeared. They noticed if it was absent. Without realizing it, they had quietly welcomed it into their ordinary lives. Near the riverbank, fishermen were returning from an early morning on the Nile. Their narrow wooden boats drifted toward shore carrying woven nets that still glistened with water. The catch had been modest. Several tilapia. A few catfish. Enough to feed families and provide offerings where needed. One fisherman carefully untangled a damaged section of net while sitting beneath the shade of an acacia tree. Beside him rested a clay cup filled with cool water. A lean black cat approached with cautious steps. The fisherman looked up. He recognized the animal from many previous mornings. Without speaking, he placed one very small fish beside the edge of the boat. The cat waited until the fisherman withdrew his hand. Only then did it approach the simple gift. There was trust between them, built not through training but through many quiet mornings shared beside the river. The fisherman returned to repairing his net. His fingers worked patiently through each knot. The cat carried its meal toward the shade before settling comfortably beneath the tree. The river continued flowing beside them. Gentle ripples caught the sunlight like countless tiny mirrors. Back inside the temple, a young apprentice followed an older scribe through a shaded hallway lined with painted reliefs. The apprentice carried fresh papyrus under one arm. The older man carried a wooden box containing reed pens, ink, and small polished stones used to smooth the writing surface. The older scribe walked more slowly than he once had. His eyesight remained sharp enough for careful writing, but his knees reminded him of every passing year. As they entered the writing chamber, they found a familiar brown cat already waiting upon the window sill. It had arrived before them, just as it did nearly every morning. The apprentice gently opened the wooden shutters. Cool air drifted into the room. The cat closed its eyes for a moment, enjoying the breeze. Outside, the temple gardens shimmered softly beneath the strengthening sunlight. Butterflies wandered among blooming flowers. Palm leaves moved in slow, graceful waves. The older scribe arranged his writing tools before sitting. He paused for a moment to watch the cat. "There you are again," he whispered so quietly that even the apprentice barely heard him. The cat answered only by blinking slowly. It seemed enough. The older man smiled and dipped his reed pen into fresh black ink. Soon the soft scratching of careful writing joined the peaceful sounds of the morning. Around the temple, the hours continued their quiet journey toward midday. The shadows beneath the columns became shorter. The warmth upon the stone grew stronger. Workers took longer drinks from their water jars. The gardeners paused more often beneath the shade of date palms. Even the cats began searching for the coolest resting places they knew so well. They understood the land. They understood the seasons. They understood that every morning of gentle work would eventually lead to another warm afternoon, another peaceful evening, another cool night beneath the stars. And so, with calm hearts and familiar routines, both people and cats continued through another ordinary day in ancient Egypt, where kindness was often shown not through grand gestures, but through quiet habits repeated faithfully beneath the endless Egyptian sky. As the sun climbed higher above the broad valley of the Nile, the morning slowly gave way to the first quiet signs of midday. The light became brighter, almost white upon the limestone walls of the temple. The long shadows that had stretched across the courtyards at dawn now gathered close beneath columns and doorways, offering only narrow islands of shade. The workers noticed the change without needing to look toward the sky. They felt it upon their skin. The warmth settled gently across their shoulders. The air became a little drier with every passing moment. Even the breeze seemed to move more slowly. No one hurried. There was little reason to do so. The people who spent their lives beside the Nile understood that the strongest hours of the day belonged to patience. The sun could not be challenged. It could only be respected. Near the temple entrance, a young man swept the last traces of windblown sand from the broad stone steps. Every morning the desert left its quiet gift. Fine grains of sand gathered in the corners, along the carved edges of the stairs, and beside the great wooden doors. The young sweeper worked with slow, even strokes. His broom whispered across the stone. Each movement sounded soft enough to blend with the gentle rustle of palm leaves beyond the walls. As he reached the final step, a familiar ginger cat appeared from behind one of the great columns. The animal sat a short distance away. Its bright eyes followed the sweeping broom with calm curiosity. The young man smiled. He had seen this cat nearly every day since he first began working at the temple several years earlier. Sometimes it arrived before him. Sometimes it waited until he had almost finished. Its habits remained mysterious, yet somehow comforting. When the last of the sand had been gathered into a basket, the sweeper rested both hands upon the wooden handle of the broom. For a few quiet moments, he and the cat simply watched the courtyard awaken around them. Temple visitors entered through the gate in small groups. Some carried woven baskets filled with fruit. Others held bundles of flowers gathered beside the river. A farmer arrived with several jars of fresh honey carefully wrapped in linen. Another man led a small donkey carrying sacks of barley balanced evenly across its back. The donkey walked with patient steps. Its ears twitched now and then at the buzzing of flies. The ginger cat remained where it was, calmly observing each arrival. Nothing seemed to surprise it. The temple had welcomed countless mornings before this one. This day was simply another peaceful thread woven into a much larger tapestry of time. Inside one of the shaded courtyards, several women washed linen cloth in large clay basins. Fresh water shimmered in the morning light. They worked carefully, rubbing the fabric against smooth stones before rinsing it again. The clean cloth would later dry upon ropes stretched between wooden posts where the warm desert air would gently finish the task. Nearby, a small black kitten became fascinated by the moving water. It approached the basin with cautious steps. Its nose twitched. One tiny paw reached toward the rippling surface. The moment its paw touched the water, the kitten pulled it back with gentle surprise. Tiny droplets scattered across the stone. One of the women noticed and smiled quietly. The kitten looked at its damp paw for several long moments, as though trying to understand what had happened. Then, with great seriousness, it carefully licked each drop away. The women returned to their washing. The kitten continued studying the basin from a safer distance. No lesson had been spoken. The little animal had discovered something new entirely on its own. Across the temple gardens, the fragrance of herbs drifted through the warming air. Mint, coriander, young onions. The rich scent of damp earth still lingered where the gardeners had watered the planting beds earlier that morning. Soon the ground would begin to dry beneath the strengthening sun. For now, it remained cool enough to kneel comfortably. An elderly gardener carried a woven basket filled with fallen palm fronds. These would later be used for simple repairs, woven mats, or kindling for cooking fires. Nothing useful was wasted. The temple relied upon careful hands and thoughtful habits. As he walked between the garden paths, he noticed a white cat sleeping beneath a fig tree. The broad leaves above filtered the sunlight into soft patches of green and gold. The cat lay stretched comfortably upon the cool earth. One ear twitched now and then as insects buzzed lazily nearby. The gardener stopped for only a moment. He looked upward into the branches. A ripe fig had fallen during the night. He picked it up, brushed away a little dust, and placed it into his basket. The cat never woke. The gardener continued on his way with quiet footsteps, careful not to disturb the peaceful sleeper. Beyond the gardens, the temple workshops remained busy while the day was still young enough for steady labor. Stonemasons shaped small blocks needed for repairs. Their copper tools tapped gently against limestone with measured rhythm. The sounds echoed softly through the open courtyard. Not loud. Not harsh. Simply steady. Nearby, woodworkers sanded rough boards until they became smooth beneath careful fingers. The pleasant scent of fresh cedar drifted into the warm air. Wood shavings curled upon the floor like dry leaves. A gray cat wandered slowly between the work tables. The craftsman hardly looked up. Its presence had become as ordinary as the scent of wood or the sound of chisels. One carpenter gently moved a pile of shavings away from a narrow path where the cat liked to walk. He did so almost without thinking. Small kindnesses often become habits after many years. No one praised him. No one even noticed. Yet the path remained clear. The cat continued without interruption. In another corner of the workshop, a young apprentice polished a wooden stool using smooth stones and fine sand. His teacher had explained that careful work always revealed itself in the smallest details. A stool might seem simple. Yet if one leg remained uneven, it would rock upon the floor forever. The apprentice checked each leg patiently. He ran his hand across every surface. Only when the wood felt perfectly smooth did he place the stool beside the others. As he stepped back, the gray cat immediately climbed onto the finished seat. It circled once. Then settled comfortably. The apprentice laughed softly. His teacher looked over, smiled, and nodded. "If the cat approves," the older craftsman said quietly, "perhaps it is ready." The words drifted gently through the workshop. No one laughed loudly. The peaceful mood remained untouched. Outside the temple walls, the nearby fields stretched toward the shining Nile. Farmers continued their morning work before the afternoon heat arrived. Some guided oxen through soft earth. Others checked young crops planted after the river's most recent flood. The fertile black soil felt cool beneath bare feet. Water channels reflected the brilliant sky. Egrets followed behind the workers, searching for insects disturbed by each careful step. One temple cat had wandered into the fields earlier that morning. It walked along the raised path separating one planting bed from another. A farmer noticed it from across the field. He raised one hand in quiet greeting. The cat paused briefly before continuing along its chosen path. The farmer smiled to himself. It reminded him of the cat that had lived beside his childhood home many years ago. That old companion had followed him to the fields every morning, sitting nearby while he learned to plant grain beside his father. Some memories remained warm long after the seasons had passed. As the sunlight brightened further, shimmering waves of heat began rising above the distant desert. The horizon softened slightly. Palm trees appeared to dance gently in the warm air. The workers knew that midday was approaching. Water jars became more important. Shade became more precious. Even conversations grew shorter as everyone quietly saved their strength. The temple cats also adjusted their routines. One by one they searched for familiar resting places. A broad windowsill cooled by thick stone walls. A quiet corner behind stacked baskets. The shaded floor beneath a cedar table. The cool entrance to the grain store. Each cat seemed to know exactly where comfort could be found. The oldest among them had discovered these places years before. The younger ones learned simply by watching. No one taught them. The knowledge passed silently from one generation to the next. Within the inner courtyard, the oldest temple caretaker slowly crossed the smooth stone carrying a small woven basket filled with scraps of worn linen. Some pieces would become cleaning cloths. Others would be woven into simple padding for baskets or jars. As he walked, he noticed 3 young kittens sleeping together beneath a stone bench. One rested with its tiny head across another's back. The third had stretched one paw into a narrow beam of sunlight. The old caretaker stopped. The sunlight would soon move. Within an hour, it would fall directly upon the kittens. Without making a sound, he unfolded one of the larger pieces of worn linen and tied it carefully between 2 nearby posts. It created a small patch of shade above the sleeping family. The kittens never stirred. The caretaker smiled gently and continued his slow walk across the courtyard. No one else saw the quiet act. No one thanked him. There was no need. The simple kindness became part of another peaceful day, one more small moment shared between the people of the temple and the cats who had made those ancient stone halls their home for generations beyond counting. By the time the sun stood nearly overhead, the temple and the surrounding village had settled into the slow, careful rhythm that always arrived with the middle of the day. The bright light filled every open courtyard. The pale limestone reflected it upward, making the air seem almost to shimmer above the ground. The morning's busiest work had been finished. The broad courtyards had been swept. The gardens had received their first watering. Fresh bread rested upon woven trays. The storehouses had been inspected. The writing rooms had grown quiet with the gentle scratching of reed pens across smooth sheets of papyrus. Now another pace took over. A slower one. A softer one. The people who had lived beside the Nile all their lives understood that midday was not the time for rushing. The sun asked everyone to move carefully, to conserve strength, and to welcome the shade whenever it could be found. Even the birds flew lower. Even the donkeys slowed their steps. Even the breeze seemed content to rest. The temple cats understood this better than anyone. Long before the stone floors became too warm to cross comfortably, they had already chosen their favorite resting places. One large gray cat disappeared beneath a stone bench beside the northern wall. The thick limestone kept the ground pleasantly cool. Another climbed onto a wooden shelf inside the weaving room, where bundles of fresh linen softened the hard surface. A mother cat led her 3 growing kittens beneath a staircase that remained shaded from sunrise until evening. It had become their little world. Safe. Cool. Quiet. The kittens curled close together almost at once. Their small bodies rose and fell with slow, peaceful breathing. Their mother remained awake a little longer. She looked toward the bright courtyard. She listened. Only after she was certain everything remained calm did she close her own eyes. The weaving room was peaceful during these warmer hours. The weavers continued working, but more slowly than before. Large upright looms stood in neat rows. Threads of pale linen stretched tightly between wooden beams. Patient hands passed the shuttle back and forth with steady rhythm. Wood tapped softly. Thread tightened. Another row appeared. Then another. The sound never became loud. It blended into the quiet atmosphere like gentle rain upon distant leaves. One elderly weaver paused for a moment to rest her hands. Years of careful work had made her fingers strong, yet they tired more quickly now than they had when she was young. She looked toward the shelf where the gray cat slept among folded linen. The animal had not moved for nearly an hour. Only one ear twitched now and then whenever a fly wandered too close. The weaver smiled. She often thought the cat had chosen the finest resting place in the entire temple. Soft cloth beneath. Shade above. No footsteps nearby. Only the peaceful rhythm of weaving to accompany sleep. Outside, the heat continued to grow. The open courtyard appeared almost empty. Only a few workers crossed it now, each carrying out tasks that could not wait until evening. One young water carrier balanced 2 clay jars across a wooden pole resting upon his shoulders. The jars felt especially heavy beneath the midday sun. He walked carefully, choosing the narrow paths where the shadow of the temple walls offered brief moments of relief. As he reached the kitchen entrance, he stopped beside a shallow stone basin. The water inside had become warm from the heat. Still, several sparrows fluttered down to drink. A small black cat watched from beneath a nearby table. It made no attempt to chase the birds. The afternoon stillness seemed to have settled over everyone alike. The sparrows drank without fear. The cat watched without moving. For a little while, the courtyard belonged equally to both. The young water carrier smiled quietly before continuing into the kitchen. The temple kitchen smelled wonderful at this time of day. Fresh bread still filled the air with its warm fragrance. Clay pots simmered gently over low fires. Lentils cooked slowly. Onions softened in earthen vessels. Bundles of herbs hung from wooden beams where the air remained dry. The cooks moved with calm confidence. Most preparations had already been completed. Now they simply watched over the food while it cooked at its own steady pace. An older cook wiped her forehead with a piece of linen. The ovens filled the room with comforting warmth even without the afternoon sun. Near the doorway lay the old white cat that had rested there for so many years. Its breathing remained slow and peaceful. Occasionally another cat wandered into the kitchen, looked around, and quietly settled in a different corner. The cooks welcomed them without words. The animals asked for very little. A cool place. A familiar room. The occasional crumb. Nothing more. Far beyond the kitchens, the scribes continued their careful work inside thick-walled rooms where the heat could not easily enter. Light reached their tables through narrow windows cut high into the stone walls. The sunlight was bright enough for writing but gentle enough to protect their eyes. The room smelled faintly of ink, papyrus, and smooth cedar wood. The older scribe rested his pen for a moment. He flexed his fingers slowly. Writing required a different kind of strength. Not the strength needed to carry water or shape stone. Instead, it asked for steady hands, patient eyes, and long hours of quiet attention. He looked toward the windowsill. The familiar brown cat remained there, exactly where it had been since morning. Outside the window, butterflies drifted lazily above the flowers. The cat watched them with relaxed interest. It did not seem tempted to leap. The heat had made even butterflies appear slow and dreamy. The scribe dipped his pen into fresh ink once more. The gentle scratching resumed. Nearby, the apprentice carefully prepared another sheet of papyrus. He had begun to recognize the rhythm of the older man's work. Write. Pause. Stretch the fingers. Watch the garden for a moment. Continue writing. The quiet routine felt comforting. It reminded him that careful work did not need to be hurried to be worthwhile. Beyond the temple walls, the fields shimmered beneath the powerful sun. Most farmers had sought shade until the hottest hours passed. A few rested beneath clusters of date palms. Others returned briefly to their mudbrick homes for a simple meal of bread, onions, and cool water. Children slept during these warm hours. Dogs rested in narrow strips of shadow beside walls. The entire landscape seemed to breathe more slowly. Even the Nile appeared calmer. Its gentle current reflected the brilliant sky like polished blue stone. A fisherman sat beneath a woven shelter repairing one of his nets. He worked without haste. There would be time enough to return to the river when the afternoon cooled. Beside him rested the same lean black cat that often visited the boats. The cat had finished its meal long ago. Now it simply watched the river. Small ripples reached the muddy bank. A pair of ducks drifted quietly downstream. The fisherman tied another careful knot. Neither seemed eager to interrupt the peaceful silence. Back at the temple, one of the younger priests crossed the shaded inner courtyard carrying a small basket filled with fresh lotus blossoms. The flowers had opened beautifully that morning. Their pale petals remained cool despite the heat. As he walked, he noticed a tiny kitten asleep directly in the middle of the path. The kitten had found the only cool patch beneath a narrow column of shade. The priest stopped. He could easily have stepped around it. Instead, he waited. A gentle breeze stirred. The kitten opened one sleepy eye. It stretched both front paws. Then, quite calmly, it stood and wandered toward its mother beneath the nearby staircase. Only then did the priest continue his walk. There had been no need to hurry. Time moved differently here. The temple had stood for generations before either of them had been born. Waiting a few extra moments changed nothing at all. As the afternoon quietly approached, the heat reached its greatest strength. The courtyards fell almost completely silent. Only the soft cooing of pigeons echoed from the high ledges. Palm leaves barely moved. The air shimmered above the stone. The cats slept deeply in their shaded places. The workers rested whenever they could. The temple itself seemed to pause, gathering strength before the long, gentle journey toward evening would begin once again, carrying people and animals alike through another peaceful cycle of life beside the eternal waters of the Nile. The afternoon lingered quietly over the temple, as though the sun wished to hold the world in stillness for a little while longer. The brightest hours had not yet passed, and the warm air rested gently over the stone buildings, the gardens, and the dusty roads leading toward the river. There was very little movement. Those who had finished the hardest part of their work rested beneath shade wherever they could find it. Some leaned against cool limestone walls. Others sat beneath woven shelters built from reeds and palm branches. Many simply listened to the peaceful sounds that remained. A dove calling from a rooftop. The soft rustle of palm leaves. The distant murmur of water flowing through the temple gardens. And now and then, the quiet breathing of a sleeping cat. In the northern courtyard, the great columns cast narrow pools of shadow across the smooth stone floor. The shadows slowly shifted with the passing sun. Almost too slowly to notice. Beneath one of these columns rested the old grey Tom who had lived around the temple for many years. His whiskers had become white. His steps had slowed. Yet his eyes remained clear. He had chosen this same place countless afternoons before. The stone beneath him stayed pleasantly cool. Above him, carved scenes covered the column from its broad base to its high capital. Generations of workers had passed by these carvings. Children had looked up at them in wonder. Priests had walked beside them every day. The old cat knew nothing of the stories carved into the stone. Yet he had shared their silent company through many changing seasons. A young temple servant crossed the courtyard carrying a folded linen cloth. She noticed the cat sleeping there. Without disturbing him, she spread the cloth across a nearby bench before continuing her work. Later that evening, another worker would use it while sorting baskets of herbs. For now, it simply waited. The quiet habits of one person often made another person's work easier many hours later. Such thoughtful preparations filled the temple every day. No one spoke about them. They were simply part of living together. Near the herb garden, the air smelled fresh despite the afternoon warmth. Mint released its gentle fragrance whenever a breeze brushed across its leaves. Young coriander plants stood in neat rows beside onions and garlic. Small bees wandered slowly from flower to flower, almost lazily in the heavy air. An elderly gardener carried a shallow basket woven from reeds. Inside lay dried leaves gathered from beneath the date palms. These would be added to the compost pile where they would slowly return to the earth, helping future plants grow strong. Nothing useful was wasted. The Nile gave generously, but careful people understood that every gift deserved respect. As the gardener walked beside the irrigation channel, he noticed two young kittens sitting together on the narrow bank. They watched tiny fish swimming in the clear water. The fish darted through patches of sunlight that reached between the reeds. One kitten leaned forward with great curiosity. Its reflection trembled upon the water. A small fish flicked its tail. Gentle ripples spread outward. The kitten stepped back, surprised more than frightened. Its brother watched quietly, tilting his head as though studying the mystery alongside it. The gardener paused. He smiled to himself. He remembered watching his own children discover the world in much the same way. Small surprises often became treasured memories. He continued toward the compost pile, leaving the kittens to their peaceful investigation. Inside the weaving room, the steady rhythm of work continued. The hottest part of the afternoon encouraged slower hands rather than faster ones. The weavers understood that hurried work often led to tangled threads. Patience always produced finer cloth. The shuttle moved back and forth. Wood touched wood with a soft, familiar sound. The linen gradually grew beneath careful fingers. One young apprentice had only recently begun learning the craft. She counted each row quietly beneath her breath. Sometimes she paused to straighten a loose thread. Sometimes she watched the older women beside her, hoping to learn simply by observing. Across the room, the gray cat still slept upon the folded linen. The apprentice wondered whether the cat had dreamed through the sound of looms for so many years that it now found the gentle tapping comforting. Perhaps the familiar rhythm had become like a quiet lullaby. The thought made her smile. She returned her attention to the loom. Outside, a pair of temple guards exchanged duties near the western gate. One had stood watch since sunrise. The other arrived carrying a clay water jar and a small bundle of bread wrapped in linen. Their conversation remained short. The day had been peaceful. No unusual visitors had arrived. The gates had remained busy during the cool morning and almost silent through the hottest hours. The older guard took a long drink of water before preparing to walk home. As he adjusted his sandals, a black cat emerged from beneath the gatehouse. It rubbed gently against the stone doorway before stretching in the shade. The guard lowered one hand toward it. The cat sniffed his fingers briefly. Then it settled beside the wall. The guard nodded quietly before beginning the dusty walk back toward his village. Tomorrow morning, he would return before sunrise. The cat would likely be waiting again. Some routines became so familiar that they felt as steady as the rising of the sun. Far beyond the temple, the Nile continued flowing with calm determination. Its waters reflected the afternoon sky in broad ribbons of blue and silver. Small boats rested along the muddy banks while their owners waited for cooler weather before returning to the river. Children who had slept through the hottest hours slowly began waking inside nearby homes. Mothers prepared simple afternoon meals. The smell of warm bread drifted through open doorways. Clay cups filled with cool water stood ready beside woven mats. Life unfolded gently. No one measured the day by clocks. Instead, people noticed the length of shadows, the warmth of the wind, and the songs of birds returning to the trees. Within one modest mud brick house near the temple walls, an elderly woman sat weaving a small basket from fresh reeds gathered beside the Nile. Her hands moved slowly but confidently. She had woven thousands of baskets throughout her life. Large ones for grain. Small ones for herbs. Strong ones for carrying vegetables. Delicate ones for flowers brought to the temple. Beside her doorway lay a small calico cat. The animal belonged to no one in particular. It wandered freely between several nearby homes. Each family greeted it kindly. Each offered a little water during the hottest days. Sometimes someone shared a few crumbs of bread or a tiny piece of fish. The cat accepted every gift with quiet dignity before continuing its peaceful rounds through the neighborhood. The elderly woman looked down from her weaving. The cat had fallen asleep. Its paws twitched gently. Perhaps it dreamed of chasing butterflies among the temple gardens. Perhaps it dreamed of climbing warm stone walls beneath the morning sun. The woman smiled softly. She continued weaving. The basket slowly took shape beneath her patient fingers. Back at the temple, the scribes had paused their writing for a short rest. Fresh ink remained covered inside small dishes. Papyrus sheets lay weighted beneath smooth stones to keep them flat. The older scribe stood beside the open window. He looked toward the gardens where the afternoon light had begun to soften ever so slightly. The heat would soon begin its slow retreat. Not yet. But soon. The familiar brown cat remained on the windowsill. It had hardly moved all day except to change position as the sunlight shifted. The older man reached out very gently. His fingers rested for only a moment upon the cat's back. Its fur felt warm. The cat opened one eye. It blinked slowly before closing it again. The scribe smiled. He said nothing. Silence suited the afternoon better than conversation. Nearby, his apprentice prepared fresh ink by slowly grinding black pigment with water upon a smooth stone palette. The quiet circular motion produced almost no sound. Outside, a breeze finally stirred the garden leaves. The lotus flowers upon the pond moved gently. Dragonflies lifted once more into the air. The smallest signs of evening's approach had begun. The cat sensed them before most people did. One by one they stretched after their long afternoon sleep. A tabby climbed down from a windowsill. A white cat emerged from beneath the staircase with her 3 growing kittens following close behind. The old gray tom beneath the northern column rose carefully to his feet, stretched each leg in turn, and began walking toward the grain store for his familiar evening patrol. The temple itself seemed to awaken again. Not with noise. Not with haste. Only with the quiet understanding that another peaceful afternoon was slowly giving way to the gentle hours of evening, when the air would cool, the shadows would lengthen across the ancient stone, and both people and temple cats would once again share the calm closing moments of another ordinary day beside the timeless waters of the Nile. The first hints of evening arrived so quietly that they were easy to miss. The air, which had rested heavily over the temple through the long afternoon, slowly began to move again. A gentle breeze wandered in from the direction of the Nile, carrying with it the cool scent of river water, damp reeds, and fertile earth. It slipped through open gateways, drifted beneath stone archways, and stirred the broad leaves of the date palms. One by one, the workers noticed. Not because they looked toward the river. They simply felt the welcome change upon their skin. The hardest heat of the day had begun to fade. No one spoke of it. There was no need. The body understood before the mind did. The temple itself seemed to take a long, quiet breath. The courtyards that had rested in near silence through the afternoon slowly welcomed movement once more. Doors opened. Footsteps returned. Soft voices drifted across the stone. The day's work was not yet finished, but it no longer felt weighed down by the powerful sun. Near the grain store, the old gray Tom continued his familiar evening walk. His movements were slow, measured by many seasons rather than by youthful energy. Every few steps he stopped. He lifted his nose toward the cooling breeze. The smells of the temple changed as evening approached. Fresh bread had been replaced by the comforting aroma of warm lentils. The gardens released richer scents as the day's heat left the leaves. The damp earth beside the irrigation channels became easier to notice. Even the stone carried its own quiet fragrance after hours beneath the sun. The old cat seemed to recognize every one of these changes. He had lived through countless evenings just like this. The temple had become a map written not only in walls and pathways, but also in familiar scents carried gently upon the wind. Inside the kitchens, preparations for the evening meal continued at an unhurried pace. Clay pots simmered softly above glowing coals. A young cook stirred a pot of lentils using a smooth wooden spoon worn shiny by years of careful use. Nearby, another worker sliced onions upon a flat stone. The sharp fragrance mixed gently with the smell of fresh herbs gathered from the temple garden earlier that morning. An older baker arranged the last warm loaves inside woven baskets. He covered them with linen cloth to keep them soft until supper. Near the doorway, the elderly white cat slowly opened its eyes. It had slept through much of the afternoon. Now it stretched each leg one at a time. Its back arched gently. Its tail rose high for a moment before settling once again. One of the cooks noticed. She smiled quietly and brushed a few crumbs from the table onto the floor nearby. The old cat walked over without hurry. It ate only a little. Then it sat beside the doorway once more, content simply to watch the peaceful work unfolding around it. The kitchen was one of its favorite places. Not because food was always plentiful, but because it was filled with familiar people. Familiar voices. Familiar smells. The rhythm of the room had hardly changed through the years. Outside, the temple gardens welcomed the return of birds that had hidden through the hottest hours. Small finches fluttered between flowering shrubs. A pair of doves landed beside the shallow pool where lotus blossoms floated peacefully upon still water. The blossoms themselves had changed throughout the day. Those that had opened wide beneath the morning sun now began closing their petals little by little, preparing for another quiet night. The gardeners walked slowly among them. One elderly gardener carried a small clay pitcher. He poured fresh water around several young fig trees planted only a few months before. Their roots were still finding their place in the rich Nile soil. Evening watering gave them time to drink before another hot day arrived. As he worked, the white cat from beneath the fig tree earlier that morning appeared once again. She walked beside him for several moments. Neither hurried. Neither expected anything from the other. When the gardener stopped to water another tree, the cat settled beneath its growing shade. The man looked down. "Another peaceful day," he whispered so softly that only the breeze might have carried his words. The cat blinked slowly. Perhaps that was answer enough. Across the gardens, 3 young kittens explored the world with growing confidence. The afternoon sleep had filled them with fresh curiosity. Everything seemed worthy of careful inspection. A fallen palm leaf. A smooth pebble warmed by the day's sunlight. The fluttering wings of a butterfly. One kitten discovered its own reflection in a quiet pool beside the irrigation channel. It leaned closer. The reflection leaned closer too. The kitten lifted one paw. The image did the same. Very carefully, it touched the surface of the water. Gentle circles spread across the pool. The reflected kitten disappeared. The little explorer stepped back in surprise. Then, after a thoughtful pause, it leaned forward again. This time it simply watched the ripples until the water became still once more. Its mother observed everything from beneath a nearby bush. She did not interfere. Some lessons could only be learned through quiet experience. Near the workshops, the sounds of labor softened as the craftsmen completed the final tasks of the day. A carpenter wiped fine cedar dust from his workbench. His newest stool stood neatly beside several finished chairs waiting to be carried into storage. He inspected each piece one final time. Running his hand across the smooth wood, he searched for rough places that still needed attention. His fingers found none. Satisfied, he smiled gently. The gray workshop cat climbed onto the stool once more. It circled slowly before lying down. The carpenter laughed under his breath. "You always choose the newest seat." His apprentice looked over and smiled. Perhaps the cat appreciated smooth wood. Perhaps it simply enjoyed the higher view. No one truly knew. The mystery itself added to its quiet charm. The tools were cleaned with care. Copper blades were wrapped in linen. Wooden handles were brushed free of dust. Nothing was left carelessly where moisture or sand might damage it. Every tool represented many hours of work. Looking after them was as important as using them well. The craftsmen understood that careful habits made tomorrow's work easier. As they closed the workshop doors, the gray cat slipped outside ahead of them. Its evening journey had begun. In the writing chamber, the older scribe finally laid aside his reed pen. The last line of the day's work rested neatly upon the papyrus. He waited a moment for the ink to dry before carefully rolling the sheet. His apprentice tied it gently with a narrow strip of linen. The room grew quiet. The scratching of the pen had ended. Only the breeze remained. The familiar brown cat stretched upon the window sill. It jumped lightly onto the floor. Then it wandered through the open doorway toward the gardens, where the evening air felt fresh against its fur. The older scribe watched it go. He often wondered where the cat spent its nights. Upon the rooftops? Inside the gardens? Perhaps near the grain store? The temple was full of quiet places known only to the animals themselves. He smiled at the thought. Some mysteries never needed solving. Far beyond the temple walls, the nearby village also welcomed the gentle return of evening. Families gathered outside their mud-brick homes where the air felt cooler. Children played softly in the dusty lanes before supper. An elderly man repaired a fishing basket beneath the shade of a sycamore tree. A woman ground grain upon a smooth stone while humming a tune so quietly it blended with the breeze. Donkeys returned from the fields carrying empty baskets. Goats settled into simple shelters for the night. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. The smell of warm bread drifted through the village. A calico cat wandered from doorway to doorway. Everyone recognized it. One child offered a tiny piece of fish. The cat accepted politely before continuing its slow evening walk. No house claimed it. Yet every family welcomed its peaceful visits. Back at the temple, the guards prepared for another night. Fresh oil filled the lamps beside the gateways. The evening watch quietly greeted those whose duties had ended. The great wooden doors remained open while the last visitors departed. One guard noticed the old gray tom crossing the entrance court. He stepped aside without thinking. The cat continued at the same calm pace. Their paths had crossed so many times that each seemed to understand the other. As the sun lowered toward the western horizon, its golden light spread across the temple walls. The carved figures glowed warmly for a little while before shadows slowly climbed over them once again. The stone, so bright beneath the afternoon sun, now held softer colors. Amber, honey, gentle rose. The temple cats wandered through this beautiful light as they always had, their quiet footsteps woven into the peaceful rhythm of another ancient evening. Soon the stars would begin their slow return above the Nile. The day's work would gently fade into night's deep stillness. But for now, the temple rested in that precious hour between sunlight and darkness, when both people and cats moved unhurried through familiar places, grateful for the cool breeze and the quiet comfort of another ordinary day in ancient Egypt. The sun lowered little by little toward the western horizon, and the bright colors of the afternoon softened into gentle shades of amber and pale gold. Across the temple grounds, every wall and every column seemed to glow with quiet warmth. The stone that had reflected fierce light only a short time before now held a calmer beauty. Long shadows stretched across the courtyards. They reached farther with every passing moment. The air became easier to breathe. Workers who had rested during the hottest hours quietly returned to finish the small tasks that always remained before nightfall. No one hurried. Evening was generous. It offered enough time for careful work. Near the temple well, several young servants gathered with empty clay jars. Morning had required many trips to carry fresh water into the kitchens, gardens, and workshops. Now the evening called for another round. Water would be needed before dawn. The first bakers would arrive while the stars still shone overhead. The gardeners would begin watering long before sunrise. Everything worked more smoothly when the day's preparations were completed before sleep. The rope creaked softly as the first bucket descended into the deep well. A few moments later came the familiar splash. The sound echoed upward through cool stone. One servant smiled. She had heard that same splash nearly every day since childhood. Some sounds became so familiar that they felt almost like old friends. Nearby, a slender black cat waited patiently upon the edge of the well. It never stood too close. It simply watched. Its bright eyes followed the rising bucket. Drops of cool water slipped from the clay vessel as it reached the surface. The sunlight caught each falling drop before it disappeared into the dust below. When the jars had all been filled, one young servant poured a little water into the shallow stone hollow beside the well. She did not speak. She simply smiled as the black cat stepped forward. The animal lowered its head and drank slowly. Its reflection trembled gently upon the water. When it had finished, it blinked once toward the servant before quietly walking away. Neither expected gratitude. Kindness had become part of the temple's daily rhythm. In the gardens, the evening breeze carried the sweet fragrance of flowering plants through narrow pathways lined with smooth stones. The lotus blossoms upon the ponds had nearly closed for the night. Their broad leaves floated quietly upon still water. Tiny insects schemed across the surface, leaving delicate ripples behind them. The older gardener who had planted the young fig trees earlier walked once more among the beds of herbs. He carried no tools this time. Only a small woven basket. As he moved between the rows, he gathered dried leaves that had fallen during the day. A little pruning here. A little tidying there. Nothing difficult. Simply small tasks that made tomorrow's work easier. The white cat rested beneath the newest fig tree. Its eyes followed the gardener for a while before closing again. The man paused beside the tree. He looked upward. The leaves were larger than they had been only a few weeks earlier. The young branches had become stronger. Growth happened quietly. Day after day. So slowly that it was easy to overlook. Yet each evening brought tiny changes. The gardener smiled. He had learned long ago that patience often revealed the greatest rewards. The cat seemed to understand patience just as well. It had chosen the same quiet place every evening for many days. There was comfort in familiar habits. The workshops gradually grew quieter. The stonemasons placed their chisels inside wooden boxes lined with folded cloth. Carpenters stacked smoothboards neatly against the walls. The smell of cedar lingered pleasantly in the warm evening air. One apprentice carefully swept wood shavings into a basket. He had learned that even the smallest pieces might later help light cooking fires. Nothing useful should be wasted. The gray workshop cat wandered between the benches one final time. It paused beside a small pile of cedar curls. The fresh scent filled the air. The cat sniffed them carefully before lying down beside the basket as though approving of the day's work. The apprentice laughed softly. His teacher noticed. "The workshop seems quieter when our little visitor is not here," the older carpenter said. The apprentice nodded. It was true. The cat did very little. It rarely interrupted anyone. Yet somehow its calm presence made the room feel complete. Sometimes companionship asked for almost nothing. Only quiet sharing of the same place. As the craftsmen left together, the cat followed them outside. For a few moments they all walked along the same stone path. Then the men turned toward the village. The cat disappeared toward the temple gardens. Each followed a familiar road. Inside the writing chamber, the older scribe had finished storing the day's scrolls. The papyrus rolls rested safely upon wooden shelves. Small jars of ink had been covered. Reed pens had been washed carefully before drying upon folded linen. The apprentice swept tiny fragments of trimmed papyrus from the floor. The room slowly returned to perfect order. The brown cat appeared once more at the doorway. It had already explored the gardens and the courtyards. Now it sat quietly in the fading sunlight that stretched across the threshold. The older scribe looked at it with gentle amusement. "You always know when it is time to leave." The cat blinked slowly. It stood. Without haste, it walked beside the scribe through the long corridor. Their footsteps echoed softly between the painted walls. At the courtyard, the cat continued straight ahead while the scribe turned toward his modest home outside the temple. Neither looked back. Tomorrow morning they would likely meet again. The certainty of that thought brought quiet comfort. Outside the temple walls, the fields beyond the village had become beautiful beneath the lowering sun. The fertile soil reflected deep shades of brown and gold. Palm trees cast long shadows across narrow irrigation channels. Farmers finished tying bundles of harvested reeds. Oxen walked steadily toward simple shelters where they would rest through the night. Birds crossed the evening sky in loose flocks, returning to familiar nesting places among the trees. Along one dusty path, an elderly farmer carried a wooden hoe across his shoulder. His sandals were covered with fine river mud that had dried during the afternoon. The day had been long. His back felt tired. Yet there was satisfaction in honest work completed before sunset. As he passed the edge of the temple wall, he noticed a small tabby cat sitting upon a low stone. It watched the swallows circling overhead. The farmer paused. He lowered the hoe from his shoulder and rested for a moment. Neither he nor the cat seemed eager to interrupt the peaceful silence. The breeze carried the scent of nearby wheat fields. A bell tied around the neck of a grazing goat rang softly in the distance. The farmer breathed deeply before continuing home. The tabby remained where it was. Evening offered enough beauty for everyone. Back in the village, cooking fires glowed more brightly as darkness slowly approached. Families gathered outside their homes while the air remained cool. Children helped grind grain or fetch water. Grandparents sat upon low stools weaving baskets or repairing fishing nets. Simple conversations drifted through the narrow streets. No one spoke loudly. After a long day beneath the sun, quiet voices felt more natural. The calico cat continued its evening journey from house to house. At one doorway an old woman offered a few crumbs of fresh bread. At another, a fisherman placed a tiny piece of dried fish upon the ground. The cat accepted each gift calmly. It never lingered long. Its path carried it gently through the village until, as twilight deepened, it returned once more toward the familiar temple walls. The great entrance stood open beneath the fading sky. The evening guards had already lit the first oil lamps. Small golden flames flickered softly behind polished clay covers. Their light mixed with the last rays of the setting sun. One guard watched the calico cat pass through the gateway. He smiled without speaking. He had seen the same evening walk for many seasons. Soon, the doors would close until morning. The workers would rest. The gardens would fall silent. The stars would once again spread across the Egyptian sky. And within the peaceful embrace of the temple, the cats would begin another quiet night of wandering ancient halls, moonlit courtyards, fragrant gardens, and cool stone passages, keeping company with the timeless rhythms that had gently shaped life beside the Nile for countless generations. Twilight settled over the temple with remarkable gentleness. The last golden light lingered upon the highest columns while the lower courtyard slowly slipped into cool blue shadows. For a little while, both day and night seemed to share the same peaceful space. The warm colors of the setting sun rested upon the upper stone, while the first evening stars quietly appeared above the eastern horizon. It was one of the calmest moments of the day. Many workers paused without realizing it. A gardener carrying an empty basket looked toward the sky before beginning the walk home. A baker stepped outside the kitchens to enjoy the cool breeze after hours beside warm ovens. A young apprentice rubbed tired hands together after a day of careful weaving. Even the donkeys standing near the outer wall seemed content to remain still. Nothing needed to be rushed. The day had given everything it intended to give. Now the evening offered its own quiet gifts. The first oil lamps were lit one by one. A temple servant carried a small clay vessel filled with fresh oil and another holding neatly twisted linen wicks. She moved patiently through the corridors. At each lamp she paused. She adjusted the wick. She touched it gently with a small flame. A warm glow slowly appeared. Then she continued to the next. Soon soft pools of golden light rested beneath archways and beside carved walls. The lamps did not chase away every shadow. They were never meant to. Instead, they simply made the darkness feel welcoming. The cat seemed to enjoy these quiet changes. One sleek black cat walked along the edge of a lamplit corridor, its smooth coat catching flashes of warm light before disappearing again into gentle shadow. Its paws made almost no sound upon the limestone. Only its tail moved slowly from side to side. The corridor smelled faintly of warm oil, cool stone, and the lingering sweetness of incense from the nearby sanctuary. The cat paused beneath a painted wall. Above it, scenes of fields, birds, and river plants had watched over countless evenings. The colors had softened through the years, but they still held quiet beauty beneath the flickering lamps. The cat looked upward for only a moment. Then it continued toward the inner courtyard. Nearby, the evening guard began his first slow walk around the temple grounds. He carried a simple oil lamp in one hand. Its small flame danced gently whenever the breeze found its way through the open spaces. His other hand rested comfortably upon his wooden staff. The guard had followed this same path for many years. He knew every doorway, every staircase, every narrow passage between buildings. He also knew where he would likely meet the temple cats. Sure enough, before reaching the second courtyard, he found the old grey Tom sitting beside the familiar grain store. The guard nodded quietly. "So here you are. The cat answered only by blinking once. The guard smiled. He continued his slow walk. The cat remained where it was for another few moments before rising and following at a respectful distance. It was not unusual. Sometimes they shared part of the evening together without either seeming to notice. The gardens became especially beautiful after sunset. The heat that had pressed upon the plants throughout the afternoon slowly lifted away. The leaves seemed to breathe again. The evening breeze moved gently through the papyrus reeds, producing a soft whisper that blended with the distant sounds of the Nile. The lotus blossoms had nearly closed now. Their pale petals folded carefully together until another sunrise. Small bats fluttered silently above the ponds, catching insects that hovered over the water. A mother cat guided her 3 kittens along one of the narrow garden paths. The kittens had become much steadier on their feet than they had only a few weeks before. They no longer stumbled over every stone. Their curiosity had only grown stronger. Each new scent seemed worth investigating. Each rustling leaf invited careful inspection. The mother stopped beside a patch of mint. She lowered her nose toward the ground. The kittens copied her immediately. They sniffed the earth with great seriousness. The cool evening air carried many different smells. Fresh water, damp soil, flowering herbs, tiny insects hidden among the leaves. The kittens could not understand them all yet. But each evening quietly taught them something new. The mother never hurried their lessons. There was always another night, another garden, another gentle walk beneath the stars. Inside the kitchens, the evening meal had nearly ended. Most of the workers had already returned to their homes. Only a few remained behind to wash clay bowls, stack wooden trays, and tidy the room before morning. The fire inside the largest oven had settled into glowing embers. Its bright flames had become soft orange light. The room felt warm but peaceful. The elderly white cat returned to its favorite place beside the doorway. One of the cooks sat nearby upon a low stool. She had worked since before dawn. Her feet ached pleasantly after the long day. She poured herself a small cup of cool water. For a while she simply rested. The cat climbed onto the edge of the stool. Not into her lap. Only close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The cook smiled. She gently scratched behind one ear. The cat closed its eyes. Its quiet purring blended with the soft crackling of the cooling fire. Neither seemed eager to leave. The silence itself had become comfortable. Elsewhere, the temple well reflected the first bright stars. The surface of the water remained almost perfectly still. A young servant arrived carrying 2 empty jars. Tomorrow would begin long before sunrise. Fresh water needed to be waiting. She lowered the rope carefully. The familiar splash echoed upward. As she drew the bucket toward the surface, she noticed the small black kitten from earlier in the day sitting beside the well. It watched every movement with the same endless curiosity. The servant smiled. "You never miss anything." The kitten tilted its head. She filled the jars. Before leaving, she poured a little fresh water into the shallow stone basin. The kitten stepped forward. It drank quietly. Then it looked upward. The stars reflected inside the basin around its face. For one peaceful moment, it seemed as though the tiny animal were drinking from the night sky itself. Beyond the temple walls, the village settled gently toward sleep. Cooking fires became smaller. Families finished their simple meals. Children listened to the quiet voices of parents and grandparents before lying down upon woven reed mats. The smell of baked bread slowly faded into the cooler evening air. Donkeys rested inside simple shelters. Goats gathered together behind low stone walls. A dog stretched beside a doorway before closing its eyes. The calico cat completed its familiar rounds through the village. It paused briefly at several homes. Not for food this time. Only to look inside open doorways where warm lamplight spilled gently onto the dusty paths. The people smiled when they saw it. Some reached out a hand in greeting. The cat accepted a few gentle strokes before continuing toward the temple. Its evening journey rarely changed. Perhaps that sameness was part of its comfort. Back inside the temple, the older scribe sat outside his modest room for a little while before sleeping. His day's work had ended. The papyrus rolls rested safely inside. His reed pens had been cleaned. Nothing more remained to be done. The brown cat appeared from the darkness and quietly settled beside him. Together they looked toward the open courtyard. The stars multiplied overhead. The moon rose slowly above the eastern wall. Neither spoke. There was nothing that needed saying. After many years, shared silence had become its own kind of friendship. A cool breeze wandered through the columns, carrying the distant scent of the Nile. Somewhere in the gardens, one of the kittens gave a tiny questioning chirp before its mother answered with a soft, reassuring call. Palm leaves rustled gently. An owl called from beyond the temple grounds. The older scribe breathed deeply. The cat tucked its paws beneath its body. The ancient temple, so busy beneath the morning sun, had become wonderfully quiet once again. Its stone halls, fragrant gardens, peaceful courtyards, and softly glowing lamps embraced another calm Egyptian night, while the temple cats continued their gentle wanderings through familiar paths that countless generations before them had quietly shared beneath the same timeless sky. The night had grown deep, though no one had noticed exactly when it happened. One by one, the last lamps inside the temple had burned lower. Their gentle flames became smaller, softer, until they glowed like quiet stars resting upon carved stone ledges. Beyond the temple walls, the villages beside the Nile had fallen silent. Cooking fires had faded into warm embers. Doors had been closed against the cool desert air. Families rested together beneath woven blankets while the peaceful darkness wrapped itself around the ancient land. The river never truly slept. It continued its endless journey, flowing through reeds that whispered gently whenever the night breeze passed among them. Moonlight shimmered upon the calm water, breaking softly into countless silver ripples before gathering itself together once again. The temple listened. Its great columns stood exactly as they had through so many seasons. Its courtyards held the coolness of the night. Its gardens rested beneath the stars. The scent of lotus lingered quietly over still pools where folded blossoms waited patiently for another sunrise. The cats settled into their favorite places. The old grey Tom climbed once more to the familiar wall overlooking the peaceful courtyard. He lowered himself carefully onto the smooth stone, warmed long ago by the day's sunlight and now gently cooled beneath the moon. Nearby, the white cat gathered her growing kittens close together beneath the broad leaves of the young fig tree. They had explored the gardens, watched butterflies, discovered reflections upon quiet water, and followed their mother through fragrant paths. Now their small adventures belonged to memory, and sleep gently claimed them one by one. The elderly white cat curled beside the kitchen doorway where warm bread had been baked before dawn and where kind hands had quietly shared crumbs at the end of another ordinary day. The brown cat found its familiar windowsill outside the scribe's chamber. The scrolls had been safely stored. The ink had dried. The reed pens rested upon folded linen. There would be writing again tomorrow. There would be careful words, patient hands, and soft afternoon breezes drifting through the open window. Everything could wait until morning. The gardeners had finished watering the young trees. The carpenters had covered their tools. The weavers had folded fresh linen. The fishermen had tied their boats securely along the quiet riverbank. The bakers had prepared grain for another early morning. Nothing had been grand. Nothing had been extraordinary. And perhaps that was the greatest comfort of all. The life of the temple had been built not by moments of great celebration, but by countless gentle habits repeated with care. A broom moving softly across limestone. A clay jar filled with cool water. Bread rising beside a warm oven. Seeds placed carefully into rich soil. A worker stepping quietly around a sleeping cat. A child smiling at a kitten discovering the world for the first time. Tiny moments, almost invisible as they happened, quietly became the fabric of generations. The temple cats asked for very little. A shaded corner. Fresh water. A peaceful place to rest. The freedom to wander ancient halls as they pleased. In return, they offered a quiet companionship that became woven into everyday life. Their paths crossed the same stone paths as priests, gardeners, servants, bakers, guards, scribes, and children. Their lives touched countless others without asking for recognition. They reminded those around them that calm could exist even in a busy world. That stillness had its own quiet strength. That patience was sometimes the greatest wisdom. Above them all, the stars continued their slow journey across the sky. They had watched over the first builders who shaped these temple walls. They had watched the Nile rise and fall through countless seasons. They had watched children become elders, and elders return gently to memory. Tonight, they watched over one more peaceful evening. The breeze drifted through the papyrus reeds. Palm leaves answered with their soft whisper. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called only once before the silence returned. The temple breathed slowly beneath the moonlight. The river flowed without hurry. The gardens rested. The workshops slept. The kitchens grew still. The courtyards waited quietly for the footsteps of another dawn. And the cats, curled safely in their familiar places, dreamed gentle dreams beneath the timeless Egyptian sky. Perhaps they dreamed of warm morning sunlight stretching across cool stone. Perhaps they dreamed of butterflies dancing above lotus ponds. Perhaps they dreamed only of another ordinary day that would arrive as gently as every day before it. The ancient world asked for nothing more. Only another sunrise. Another quiet walk beside the Nile. Another loaf of bread warming in the ovens. Another basket woven with patient hands. Another breeze moving through the temple gardens. Another peaceful evening beneath the stars. As the moon climbed a little higher, the last sounds of waking life slowly faded into the great stillness of the night. The Nile continued onward. The temple remained watchful. The stars shone softly overhead. And all across the ancient land, the world rested in a silence that felt warm, gentle, and timeless. May that same quiet settle gently around you now. May your thoughts become as calm as the slow river. May your breathing find the easy rhythm of the evening breeze among the reeds. And may the peaceful footsteps of those temple cats, wandering softly through moonlit courtyards beside the Nile, carry you gently into a deep and restful sleep.